A millionaire widower named Jonathan lived in a sprawling estate on the edge of a small town. Ever since losing his beloved wife, Eleanor, 3 years earlier, he had become a shadow of his former self. Once full of life and laughter, he now moved through each day with a quiet sorrow that seemed to linger in every room of his grand home. His only source of joy was his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed little girl with her mother's smile. Unable to balance the demands of his business empire with fatherhood, Jonathan hired a young nanny named Clara to help care for Lily. Clara, only in her mid-20s, had an unassuming presence, but her warmth was undeniable. She had a natural bond with Lily, filling the child's days with laughter, creativity, and gentle discipline. Within weeks, Jonathan noticed that his daughter was beginning to bloom again. He was grateful, yet distant. He paid Clara well and offered her use of a guest house on the estate, but never pried into her personal life. Over time, however, something stirred within Jonathan. He began to observe more than just Clara's effectiveness as a caregiver. He noticed the way she spoke to Lily, always with patience and care, even when the child was being fussy. He saw how Clara brought life back into the house, decorating for holidays, baking cookies on rainy days, playing music in the garden. His home, once cold and still, now pulsed with warmth. Yet Clara never sought recognition. She was polite, punctual, and never stayed a minute longer than her shift required. One late afternoon, after returning home from a business meeting, Jonathan noticed Clara rushing out of the house in a hurry. She looked flustered, her eyes scanning the horizon nervously before slipping into her modest sedan. She didn't see him watching. A strange curiosity gripped him. Where did Clara go after hours? What was her life outside the walls of his estate? Driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, Jonathan followed her car at a discreet distance. They drove for over 40 minutes, leaving behind the opulence of his world, and entering the outskirts of a struggling neighborhood. Clara parked outside a worn-down apartment building, grabbed a paper bag from her car, and disappeared inside. From his car, Jonathan watched the building. After nearly half an hour, Clara re-emerged with a small boy, no older than 10, by her side. The boy clung to her hand. His clothes were too big for him, and his shoes were worn thin. Clara handed him the bag, crouched down to speak to him at eye level, and then wrapped him in a warm hug before walking back to her car, wiping her eyes discreetly. Jonathan stayed parked for a while, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Who was that boy? Why was Clara visiting him in such a place? That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the boy's grateful eyes and Clara's tender embrace haunted him. The next day, unable to resist his curiosity, he casually asked Clara how her evening had been. She smiled politely and replied that it had been quiet. She said nothing more. Jonathan didn't press her, but his curiosity now bordered on concern. For the next few weeks, Jonathan noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Clara would leave promptly and drive to that same neighborhood. Each time, she carried something with her, a bag, a box, sometimes what looked like school supplies. Eventually, he decided to confront her. One Thursday afternoon, just as Clara was gathering her things to leave, Jonathan asked her to stay a moment. "I hope you don't find this intrusive," he began gently, "but I've noticed that you go to the same place a few times a week. I followed you once." Clara's face froze. "Please don't misunderstand. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy. I just saw you with a young boy, and it's been on my mind ever since." Clara sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly. After a moment of silence, she spoke. "His name is Aaron. He's my brother's son, my nephew. My brother passed away from an overdose 2 years ago. His wife left long before that. I've been taking care of Aaron ever since." Jonathan was stunned. "You're raising him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded. "I couldn't take him full-time without risking my job. I had no money, no place big enough for both of us. So, he stays with an old neighbor during the day, and I visit him as often as I can. I bring him food, help him with his homework, make sure he knows he's loved. I'm saving up to get a proper place so he can live with me again." Jonathan was speechless. For the first time, he truly saw Clara, not just as Lily's nanny, but as a selfless, determined woman juggling heartbreak and responsibility with grace. That night, Jonathan stared at the ceiling for hours. He thought about the boy growing up in a crumbling apartment, and the woman who had restored light to his daughter's life while carrying a hidden burden of her own. The next morning, he made a decision. He called Clara into his office and handed her a sealed envelope. "I know you didn't ask for help," he said. "But I'm offering it anyway. Inside is the key to a 2-bedroom apartment just outside the estate. It's yours and Aaron's, no strings attached. You've done so much for Lily, more than I could ever repay. Let me do this for you. Clara burst into tears. For a long moment, she couldn't even speak. When she finally did, her voice cracked with emotion. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jonathan said gently. You deserve a place where your nephew can be with you. Where you can live without fear. She nodded, tears flowing freely. From that day on, Clara and Aaron moved into the apartment. Lily and Aaron became fast friends, their laughter echoing across the garden where Eleanor's roses still bloomed. Jonathan, who had once seen Clara as just a nanny, found himself seeing her in a different light, with admiration, respect, and something deeper he had long buried since his wife's passing. Over time, Jonathan and Clara spent more moments together, not out of obligation but out of shared joy. They cooked dinner with the children, took weekend trips, and slowly, without either of them planning it, built something that felt like a family. One snowy evening, a year after that conversation in the office, Jonathan stood outside the old guest house, watching Clara decorate a Christmas tree with Aaron and Lily. He smiled, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, peace. He walked inside, carrying a small velvet box in his pocket, not because he was rescuing her, but because somewhere along the way, she had rescued him too. In that single decision to follow Clara, Jonathan had discovered not a scandal, but a story of quiet sacrifice. And in giving her a home, he had unknowingly built one for himself as well. Sometimes, the answers to our loneliness aren't found in the grand halls of a mansion, but in the small, unspoken acts of kindness and love. And sometimes, following someone out of curiosity can lead you right back to your heart.